So for this video I decided to do something new. I took advice from my good friend Stoonios, and I've decided to add a bit of commentary in between the painting bits. Today's topic will revolve around our miniature Cthulu from Planet Apocalypse and his creator, H.P. Lovecraft.
Howard Phillips Lovecraft
Was an American writer that focused around cosmic horror, and eventually works similar to his would become known as Lovecraftian horror after his name. Now Lovecraft did not invent this straight from the black depths of his mind. He was inspired and influenced by previous authors such as Edgar Allan Poe. His own works would influence others, but we'll come back to that. So here's the thing that I didn't even know about until maybe last year. H.P. Lovecraft was a huge racist. So the question of the day is this: is it okay to appreciate the art and not the artist? Let's discuss. So first off, this is the biggest thing I've had to paint. The second biggest was a Reaper's miniature known as Great Mother Mashaf? This thing. So it was incredibly daunting, but then I realized this would almost likely be mainly one color with highlights and then other portions for the tentacles and the eyes. These bits on the arm I wanted to experiment with a bit, which we'll get into further along in the video. I started off with Vallejo Intermediate Green, and I thinned it down with thinner medium in order not to drown the details. I got my big brush and I got to work. I added a bit of black after a couple moments just because I wanted the green to be a bit darker. If you decide to do this and you're using drop bottles, just drop a little bit of black into your green mixture until you get the color you like. Now while this is going, let's start the discussion. So should an artist's personal beliefs in history influence whether we enjoy their individual works? Let's begin with the main question of this video, which was mentioned in an essay by Wimsatt and Beardsley, The Intentional Fallacy. What is the artist's intention? There are two follow-up questions: was his plan reasonable and sensible, and how far did he succeed in carrying this out? But for our discussion, we're just going to focus on the first. So let's start with Horror at Red Hook, which takes place in what is considered an ethnic ghetto. Can you guess which intention we're exploring first? The plot of this story is pretty similar to others. A detective has a phobia, and he describes events that led to this, eventually culminating in a cult gathering in a waterfront slum known as Red Hook that ends with reanimated dead and horrors. Pretty clear cut. But the question is, what was his intention? Well, this is pretty simple and clear cut due to him writing a letter to fellow writer Clark Ashton Smith that detailed his inspiration for the story around, well, you know what, let me just read word for word what he said. The idea that black magic exists in secret today, or that hellish antique rites still exist in obscurity, is one that I have used and will use again. When you see my new tale, The Horror at Red Hook, you will see what use I make of the idea in connection with the gangs of young loafers and herds of evil-looking foreigners that one sees everywhere in New York. So what was his intention? Well, we could say his intention was only to write a horror tale based around something that drove him mad, foreigners, and simply wanted to get this out. Unfortunately, when it comes to writing, it's not as clear cut as that, simply because once you've created an artwork and put it out in public, it becomes its own entity, separate of the writer's authority, and can be viewed, seen, and dissected by people in various ways.
Hey, yo.
Using the big brush works well for getting a lot of area at once, but eventually you'll have to switch to a smaller brush. This way you can get the pieces that you miss. I'm using a mix of army painter brushes as well as Hobby Lobby brushes that I purchased way back when I first started painting. So was he simply trying to vent out xenophobic frustrations, or was he trying to incite further rage against foreigners by painting them as occultists? It could be both, but for this discussion I have to say that he was working to incite rage, maybe not mass riots, but definitely to make others rationalize their anger by saying, look at this is completely possible. We don't know the going-ons of these foreigners. For all we know, they work with black magic and conduct hellish rites, as he himself stated. Either way, it's a harmful message, especially in the wrong hands. But now let's look at another piece of writing and see if his intention is consistent or only prevalent in certain pieces. At the Mountains of Madness centers around an Antarctic exploration that uncovers hidden cosmic races in an alien city untouched by human technology in the ice. Eventually, the humans in the story come to the conclusion of two separate species in the alien city fighting for survival, with an indefinable horror eventually being seen as the explorers make their escape. Lovecraft explained that his inspiration for this was simply his interest in Antarctic exploration and wanting to create a story around this one concept and then throwing in his themes and ideas. Honestly, I see it as his typical staple of horror with his themes of helplessness and hopelessness, unanswered questions, insanity's fragility and vulnerability. For devil's advocate, we could argue that Lovecraft was trying to convey that if we explored Earth's forests and found aboriginals, they would undoubtedly try to murder us. That's reaching, I know, it's just an example, which segues into my personal standpoint. It's always a good idea to have some background noise going on to keep you going for long periods of time. In this case, I was watching The Thing. One of the issues I had with this model is that there was a lot of hard to reach places, and I had to go back quite a few times to repaint some portions that I had missed out. Overall though, I still like this miniature. In Death of the Author by Roland Barthes, it's argued that, simply put, once the author puts out his work, his authority becomes null and void, and it's up to the reader to decide the intention, as well as what they believe was conveyed. So if I had read the horror at Red Hook before learning of Lovecraft's letter and saw the Spanish in the story committing those acts, me being a Mexican, it very easily could have been interpreted by me. It's not a fear of foreigners, but a fear of one's neighbors. I'm a foreigner, my family and friends are foreigners, so it would be more so you never really know who your friends and family are or if they're hiding some hellish secret. For these bits on the arms, I imagined that a demon or a devil lord from the game had come and ripped these portions of skin off and exposed the rotting gray meat underneath, so I put a base layer of Vallejo neutral gray first. While that dried, I moved on to the gums and used a very thin Vallejo Carmine red, which has a bit of a maroon hue to it as opposed to a flat red. I also liked the way the teeth looked with just a primer, so I left it and I just added varnish later on in the video to protect it. Mounds of Madness is simply seen in my eyes as a cosmic horror tale of monsters frozen in an uninhabitable part of our planet. So in this case, his intention is not consistent. With this in mind, is it okay to enjoy the art even when the artist is terrible? In my perspective, yes, but it's not okay to ignore the artist. I cannot say, yeah, Lovecraft was a racist, but his books outweigh that. It is more Lovecraft was a horrible racist, but his books are things that I enjoyed and choose to take at face value as simply horror. I denounce the man, but not the work. Without his work, my favorite movies would most likely not be conceived, such as The Thing, and my favorite games as well, like Dead Space. After the gray dried, I added some lines and filled in some portions using flesh tone to resemble fat and sinew. At first, when I did it, I thought it looked absolutely terrible, but once I added the last layer later on in the video, it all came together exactly how I imagined. For any newbies getting into the hobby, a good portion of painting will make you think this looks terrible, but it's always best to power through. Usually the finished product will surprise you. You're not as bad as you think. For the nails, I decided to go with black instead of a bone color just because I felt it fit the color scheme much nicer. Life isn't black and white. It's an old adage, but one that rings true. There are shades of gray, and things that you greatly enjoy shouldn't be tossed aside when they are marred by a person's history. The Usual Suspects is an exceptional movie with one of those crazy twists. To me, it is not marred by what Kevin Spacey did or could have done. Same with Beyond the Sea and Outbreak, but it will not stop me from enjoying those films. Amber Heard was shown to actually be the abusive partner in the relationship with Johnny Depp. Should this cause me to toss aside Aquaman or drive angry? Probably, but I won't, simply because I enjoy the works as a whole, not as a center point of one person. This concludes the essay portion of my video. I appreciate you guys sticking around. I kind of had to cut everything up a little way so I could talk about painting as well as this essay, so I hope I did a good job. Please stick around for the rest of the video. I still talk about painting techniques for this statue, as well as my final thoughts at the end. Thank you. For this part, I used Nuln Oil, a type of wash by Citadel that pools in areas darkening the overall base, creating natural shadows once it dries. It allows you to highlight or dry brush afterwards, creating an even nicer looking color. Always use an old brush whenever you use washes of any kind on your project. For the tentacles, I used two shades of Vallejo purple, blue violet and violet. After doing the light layer of blue violet, I did a layer of violet. What I'm doing here is showing you how I initially did colors that would change into another. You can see that it does not look natural and it sticks out rather oddly. This was done on purpose so I can show you not to do this. In a moment I do the proper thing and create an in-between color by mixing the two colors and putting it in between to create a more natural color shift. For the tips of the tentacle, I just went with black because I thought it looked cool. these weird sack-like things on his stomach, I decided to do the same as the tentacles just to get some more color in there. I then thinned down some violet to wash over it and create a nicer looking hue across it. I then added more gnome oil to the tentacles. Dry brushing is the next step. If you don't know what dry brushing is, it's really simple. You get the color you want, typically a lighter shade than the base, and dry it on a napkin until most of the paint is off. And then you brush the figure, typically across one direction, in order to get the raised parts and not the deeper parts where there are shadows. For the last step with the exposed muscle, I used a very thin carmine red, and then when I saw that it was on too thick, I cleaned the brush and dipped it in the water cup to soak up some of the paint, causing a nice wash across it, creating an effect of bloody muscle. the eyes, I used Vallejo flat red and then orange red. While the eyes dried, I used gloss varnish on the tentacles to protect them as well as to create a wet effect once it dries. Lastly, I use Vallejo yellow on the eyes to create that last layer. So where do you fall? Do you believe that the artist's history or sometimes intention should outweigh your own interpretation and enjoyment of the work? Or do you believe that it's okay to enjoy the work despite the creator? If you agree with me, leave a like and maybe subscribe. If you do not agree with me, hit the dislike button and go to the comments to tell me why. I would love to hear your own take on it and why you feel it is not acceptable. And subscribe. Thank you.
Rising from the deep, destroying all he sees. With Umi his groupie, Cthulhu saves the world.